Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. If you're new here, you should know that this is a serious educational channel. When I say a card is broken, that doesn't mean I threw it in as a 4 of into a meme deck and cherry-picked a few games where it actually worked and my opponent didn't have any disruption. No, it means there's an actual problem. In this case, that problem is that due to a technical issue with how Wheel of Potential is worded, you can draw as many cards as you want without paying any energy at all. Now, if that's all you need, be sure to leave a like and a comment on your way out so the algorithm doesn't punish me too hard for putting the good stuff in the beginning rather than dragging it out. Okay, so for those of you who are left, I imagine you're interested in knowing some more details. Let's read the instructions on Wheel of Potential very carefully. First, you get 3 energy. That's nice. Now, then, you can pay X energy. To do that, you would have to first say exactly how much you want X to be. Maybe, 50 energy. That's a good number. Now, this is interesting. It says you may pay 50 energy. The spell is worded so that you have an option of whether to pay 50 energy or not. Usually when a cost is optional, there will be some consequences specified if you don't pay, or else at least the card will make it so something good will happen, but only if you do pay. But let's keep reading. The next instruction is that each player may exile their hand and draw 50 cards. There's nothing in this instruction saying that it's in any way related to your decision of whether to pay 50 energy. When you look at it that way, paying X energy is more like a suggested donation than a cost. And similar to anything that uses that business model in real life, the only thing stopping you from just taking whatever you want and not leaving anything in the till is your sense of basic human decency and a dirty look from the person on the other side of the table. Now, I imagine about half my viewers have just left to buy as many copies of this card as their favorite online vendor will sell them. And the other half are probably staring at their screens with a skeptical look saying, yeah, well, what about this card? And that's fair. The argument that I just gave is correct, but I did gloss over a few points. So let's take a look at some similar effects and see how they're different from Wheel of Potential. Along the way, I'll comment on whether I think a template like each of these might be a good fit for Wheel. Well, a logical place to start might be the traditional route. Most of the energy cards, including OG Harness Lightning here, don't even use an X at all. They just let you pay any amount of energy, and then the effect references the amount that you paid. This neatly solves the issue of non-payment because if you pay 0, you get 0. I guess we could reword Wheel of Potential to work this way, but in my view, the text is very clunky and unnatural to read, which is a strike against it. Also, I know there's no cap on how many words a card can have on it nowadays, but it is really nettling that we have to make 2 references to the amount of energy paid this way in the template, one to draw the cards and another to check if it was more than 7. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that factors like these are the reason that WotC moved away from this template for this card. So let's see if we can do any better. Well, maybe we do want to use X then. So here's Blaze, which is about as simple as it gets with X. Let's note that unlike Wheel of Potential, Blaze has an X in its mana cost. And that means that when you're casting Blaze, one of the steps is for you to declare some number that you want to be the X. And then when you pay the cost of Blaze, you pay X generic mana and 1 red mana. When Blaze resolves, you get to deal X damage. This is the original and most common variable cost, but it's not the only possibility. The X cost doesn't have to be mana. Sickening Dreams has you pay an additional cost that involves discarding X cards, and Toxic Deluge has you pay an additional X life. Cards like these are the safest way to implement a variable cost, because there's no way to cheat it. Paying the variable cost is part of the process of putting the card on the stack, so there's no way it's optional. Now, in principle, Wheel of Potential could have been worded like this. Unfortunately, there's a very good reason why it shouldn't be. The obvious intention of this card is that you can use the 3 energy that it gives you when you're paying the X energy. That would not be possible if you paid X energy when the spell was cast but didn't get the 3 energy until it resolved. Fortunately, there are other ways to get this to work out. The most straightforward way to do that would be to just not even let the player pick what they want X to be. For example, Lucid Dreams tells you to draw X cards, but rather than paying X of some resource, it just defines the value of X for you right there in the card. Obviously, this solution isn't really viable for Wheel of Potential, but I wanted to specifically call this out because it's another essentially unrelated way that X is used in cards, and I didn't want it to confuse the issue. Now, let's take a look at this Rise of the Hobgoblins. It has a triggered ability, which incidentally are great for this kind of thing. See, unlike spells and activated abilities, triggered abilities don't have a cost that you have to pay in order to get them onto the stack. Therefore, the only way that game designers have, so far, of being able to incorporate a variable cost for variable effect paradigm into triggered abilities is by having a cost that you pay on resolution. You can see that, like Wheel of Potential, the Rise of the Hobgoblin's ability has an X cost that you may pay as it resolves. And, like with Wheel of Potential, paying this cost is optional. However, you can see that you only get to make X Goblin tokens if you do pay the X cost. This is what stops Rise of the Hobgoblins from being broken in the same way. You could indeed name whatever value you wanted for X and then just choose not to pay it. But if you do that, then you don't get to create any Goblin tokens either. When I originally posed this question to some of my colleagues, one of them even agreed with my assessment by saying that it looks like this card is missing an if you do. So metaphorically at least, I think this is really the way to go. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure if the readability is quite there on this one, so I can only give this one about a B grade. Wildborn Preserver is a variant of this idea, and the fixed wheel is only one word different from this version compared with the last one. That small difference has some major consequences though. You can check out my video on electrodominance versus deflecting swap for more details, but changing if you do to when you do has the consequence of making everything after the win into a triggered ability that triggers when you pay the cost. Sometimes that's okay, but here it would be a big change in functionality for this card, especially with consigned to memory in the set, which would go from doing absolutely nothing against wheel to effectively countering it and making its controller waste X energy. Now that's a pretty big interaction to change, especially when it's only arguably better than the previous template. There's one other way that I can think of that would solve this problem, and I've saved the best for last, because this is my favorite out of all the ideas in this video. In spite of that, it's a template that, as far as I can tell, has only been used on one card in Magic's history, though it is possible that I've missed some. Behold, Plunge into Darkness. Now what's different about this one is that it leaves off the you may from the instruction of paying the cost. In other words, it makes paying the cost mandatory. It's easy to see that this would fix the original problem with Wheel of Potential, but when you look at things from a technical perspective, it's a little bit harder to see exactly how this change in wording functions to accomplish this. So to resolve the second mode of Plunge into Darkness, the first step is to pay X life. In order to do that, you first need to say what X is. Now, it is not legal to pay a cost unless you have the resources to pay it fully. For example, you could not pay 10 life if you only had 5, even if you also had a Platinum Angel or something that could keep you alive afterwards. This is what stops players from just choosing any arbitrarily large value for X that they want. In order to legally complete the instruction of paying X life, you would need to actually have a life total that was at least as high as the value for X that you picked. Otherwise, the actions you took when trying to perform that instruction would be reversed. I think that the reason this wasn't chosen, and the reason that we don't see a lot of templates involving mandatory paying of costs in general, is that they can be really awkward if the game manages to get into a state where there's no legal way to pay the cost. For example, if you had a Platinum Angel, then you might get into a state where your life total was negative, so you wouldn't be able to pay any life. Or maybe you just have a Platinum Empyrean, which just makes it illegal for you to pay any amount of life. Fortunately, there's this rule here that says paying 0 life is always legal. If Wizards wanted to pursue this fix for Wheel of Potential, we might need a similar rule clarifying that it's always legal to pay 0 energy. And while I don't know much about Arena and Moto specifically, another potential issue is that based on what I know about computer programming, this one would probably be the most difficult to implement on a digital client. So that's the problem and a few of the ways that Wizards could fix it. In my opinion, it's extremely likely that Wheel of Potential will receive errata in the near future so that it works the way it was intended, either with one of the templates that I proposed or with something else I haven't thought of. So, as much as I would enjoy the ego boost that would come from my video noticeably influencing the price of some card, I can't recommend speccing into it. That does leave us with a pretty big elephant in the room though. What happens until then? Like, if someone plays this card in a tournament, should a judge rule as written or as intended? And it's not like this is unprecedented. Longtime fans of the channel might remember Henzi Tor and Sarah Paragon both had technical problems with their wording on release 2. I feel like the stakes are a little bit higher this time though. At least with those other two, even if they didn't have their intended effect, the card still did something. Besides that, the competitive scene, which is where having consistent answers to every question is the most important, was only minorly affected. Henzi Tor was one of those cards you couldn't even open in booster packs, and Sarah Paragon was cool and all, but it didn't see much play outside of Limited. With Wheel of Potential though, we're talking about the difference between a hardcore combo deck winning the game for 3 mana, or doing absolutely nothing. So how is this handled? Well, in a kitchen table game, the answer is whatever you and the rest of your playgroup agree on. I don't really have any jurisdiction there. If we're talking about a sanctioned tournament, the answer is whatever the head judge says. The oracle text from an official source such as Gatherer is considered to be the definitive version of any given card's text. But there's also this line saying that players cannot use errors in the oracle to abuse the rules. The head judge of a sanctioned tournament has the authority to overrule the oracle text if an error is discovered. Since this is up to the head judge's discretion, I cannot give a firm answer on what the ruling will be at any given tournament, but I will remark that if I found myself as the head judge making such a decision, I would rule as intended for this card. Specifically, if you watched my earlier videos about Henzi Tor and Sarah Paragon, you may remember that I balked at this option then. But for Wheel of Potential, I think that the intended ruling is clearer, and the potential for a given fix messing up some other interactions is lesser than in those previous times. In any case, I'm anticipating that we won't have to worry about this for very long. The fixes for Henzi Tor and Sarah Paragon required relatively involved process of writing a whole new rule to specifically cover their unique effects, whereas I think a simple errata will suffice this time. There's also a certain high-profile modern event in a couple of weeks, so yeah, I'm expecting this will be resolved pretty quickly. That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.